So just going down the line, why don't we start off by passing the microphone down, just say who you are, just for the record.
I'm John Lindell.
Randy Becker.
Bob Meyer, and by the way, we're sitting in the order that, I guess it's not there anymore. So.
Wes Gannaway.
Lanny Ream.
Let's start off with a question. It's like, how did each of you get started in collecting? What was it that got you interested? When did you get started collecting? When and how did you get started? Did you have a mentor? How did that work?
Well, I'm stuck with a microphone, so I guess I get to go first.
That worked out well.
Yeah. I've been basically a mineral collector my whole life. My mom complained when I was a little kid, maybe even crawling around, that I brought rocks in the house, which I think a few of the others out there did that too. And it just slowly progressed, actually learning that there was such a thing as agates and stuff, and then crystals and geology. And because of loving rocks and so on, I decided to become a geologist and just been doing it my whole life.
When I was a little kid, growing up, we're talking 5 to 10 years old, we lived in a small home, and so my dad had his display cabinet in my bedroom, and it was full of all kinds of goodies. Yeah, that's where it got going. And then, of course, we did a lot of fishing up in the rivers around Darrington and that area, and there's rocks in those creeks all over the place, right? So that's where I got going.
Yeah, I was born in San Francisco, and I mentioned earlier, and I've got possibly, the lead. The story always was that my great-great-grandfather, so it's like 6 generations back, actually was a gold miner, and there was somehow in Oregon, although they went down to California, and I always thought there was some connection there. And I got an amethyst from my grandmother that was apparently passed down from there. So that was like my first specimen. I remember for a long time, it was my most beautiful piece. And so I was fascinated by that, and would just get books, and anytime I could talk into like stopping at a rock shop or something, we would do it. And, like many things, when I was a teenager, sort of started getting more interested in girls and things like that. But there was always something that kind of brought me back into minerals. And one of them was going out fishing out at Westport for the salmon that we used to get. You could take charters out there, and there's a sign, rock shop, and it was like, always stop at a rock shop. That was the thing. And there was this guy, Paul Rhodes, who had been like, he's got to be one of the best field collectors that ever existed in Washington. He collected mostly, tri-state stuff. At Gilman, Colorado, we had stories that were just unbelievable about like the mines in Gilman just glinting, and so I started getting more minerals and then getting into it. And then he would head down to the south for the whole winter, and I was getting no minerals at all, for like 6 months. So I actually found a local mineral dealer, and he was much more advanced and so forth in terms of stuff. And the first time I went over there, he had this piece from Tiger, Arizona. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's actually a crystal of diabolite on there. And I was looking at it under the scope. I didn't have a scope yet, but I'm going like, what is all this stuff? And he goes, I don't know. And I'm going, well, this is fascinating. I want to specialize in this. And he laughs. He goes, you can't get anything from there. That place closed in 52. Anyways, ultimately, there was some green fibrous stuff on there. And I had Bart Cannon, used to be Cannon Microprobe. He probably goes, yeah, this is new, but you'll never get anybody to describe it. But I worked away at that, and tried to get mineralogists interested. And finally, this guy Tony Camp at the LA County Museum of Natural History agreed to take a look at it. And he said basically the same thing. It's fibrous. We can't get a structure. You need a structure nowadays. And so started writing some letters, and ultimately they got an endowment from the National Science Foundation to have it analyzed at the Argonne National Lab at the synchrotron, this particle accelerator that's visible from, space. And so they described it, and I was like just overjoyed. And then they go, "Hey, do you mind if we name it Bob Meyerite?" It's like, what? Anyways, I'm a Tiger fanatic, which is a bad thing to be because, like I said, the mine started closed in '52.
We'll continue that, but I just want to say that Bob also was the one that put Tiger Mine up on the suggested themes for next year's symposium. Okay. All right, Ream.
So I got indoctrinated into interest in minerals at an extremely young age. My mom is a geologist, or she had a degree in geology, and she's from Boston. And my dad had an interest in it. And the story goes that when I was 10 months old, I was on my dad's shoulders, and they hiked up Denny Creek and picked up rocks right at the base of the gulch. And I actually still have a sample of what they picked up. And the story is my dad carrying this big boulder in one hand and me in the other. And that was about 1953, 54. And I remember when I was, 8 or 9 years old, going up to Denny and the gulch there and picking up magnetite nodules and things. Also, a very young age, we'd go to Red Top. And that was pretty much it for those localities. Then in the early 60s, my parents bought a summer cabin on Lake Wenatchee, and we rapidly discovered that you can find garnets on the beach and little pieces of actinolite. And so I was hooked right then, and as soon as I got older and the ability to have transportation, some money to put gas in the car, I went crazy.
Well, I started out probably about the age of 4. My dad had a gravel drop. We lived down in southwest Washington near Kelso. So he had a gravel drop to do some project he was doing on, and I went out there and played in the gravel, and pretty soon I was picking out the carnelian. And I had bags of carnelian out of that gravel drop. My parents were very supportive, so they soon became rock hounds. And they did lapidary work and packed us all over field collecting, things like that. So fast forward all the way through my teens when, nothing else mattered except for, whatever you do as a teenager. But into college, I was a chemical engineer for a couple of years, ended up dropping out during the Vietnam War era. Then I went back and I took geology at the University of Washington. And I was an active climber at the time and hiker. And just by being out in the mountains a lot, I started field collecting again. And I was interested in gemstones too. I took the GIA classes and diamonds. And so then it just so happened coincidentally, my roommate at the time owned Ride-On skateboards. And they had a shop in Seattle, also one in Bellingham, one in Tri-Cities. And so I was hanging out in his shop one day, and this weird-looking guy wearing leather pants and this pack on his back was standing around just, he's definitely a strange fellow, and he was hanging out at the skateboard shop. Well, I got to talking to him. It turned out to be Jack Zexter. So Jack was my introduction to people who knew what they were talking about. So Jack introduced me to Bart Cannon, and I was Jack's wheels. Jack didn't drive, so I was Jack's wheels for probably 2 or 3 years, and he showed me all the great localities that were known at the time in the Northwest. And then I transitioned from that into being Bart Cannon's field collecting partner for almost 20 years, and we owned claims together and stuff. So anyway, that's how I began.
Okay, thanks. If you see me jumping up and down, I'm sorry about that. It's just we get feedback if the mics are too close. So before we set this up, this group had been talking amongst themselves and been thinking about, there's 5 of us, how many years, and thinking about that. There is a collective total of about 300 years of collecting experience in these 5 chairs. So, of course, all of you started when you were 4, right? So, yeah. Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to get right into it is that we're here because this is our theme for this year is the 50th anniversary of this chapter. And all of you have been involved in some way with the chapter. So if any of you want to talk about when you first got involved with this chapter and your involvement and things like that.
Well, my first year was in '78. That was the fourth symposium, and I went with Bart and Jack down to that. And it's coincidentally the first year for Lanny and the first year for Randy. We all met there at that same time. So we go back that far. From that point on, I went every year. I only missed 1 year after that, and then of course the year that we had the COVID where nobody went. So I've been to 46 symposiums. During the 80s and 90s, I was very active in the club. I was a president. I held other offices. I was the symposium chair for probably, maybe even a dozen years. Publicity chair, things like that. I've always done a display. When Alan Young was president, he asked me to be the newsletter editor. And so when he became the national president, then I moved on and became the national newsletter editor and was on the national board for a number of years. So it's been a passion of mine, and even though I'm no longer an officer, I'm not active, I kind of keep an eye on people. So.
As John indicated, I was at the 78 Symposium. That was my first one. It was in Tualatin, Oregon. And I saw advertisements in the Mineralogical Record about it and went, oh, I got to go to that. And it was a real eye-opener. And I very distinctly remember listening to Lanny's talk and afterwards talking with him. And he opened up a little toolbox or tackle box, and he had Utah topazes in there. And holy cow. So I traded a few very small zextrites to him for some topazes, which I still have. And been going to them pretty much ever since. I did miss 2 of the symposiums, one in Coeur d'Alene and another one was the fluorescent one. And I'm not counting the COVID ones, but every year besides those 2. And I've given, over the years, given multiple talks on various aspects of field collecting in the Northwest, and more recently heavily involved with Washington Pass, talks on it, and actually working with Rudy Chernick and doing research and trying to simulate research and do a lot of the unknown species we're finding at Washington Pass. Unknown to us as in we don't know what this is. There is a good potential for new species up there still, but it's a real tough hoe to do to try to get things identified from up there.
I've been involved, let me see, I've been involved since my first symposium, which I think was 1980. It was in Bellevue. And I was just going to the symposium, and I think there was one year when it just didn't seem well run, and I was, kind of complaining, and somebody said, well, how come, you don't do anything?
Might come closer.
Oh, closer? Yeah. Sorry. So so why are you complaining? You could fix it. It's like, so I started getting involved with actually being in the, I guess, management of our group. Served a couple of terms as president. I've done articles on displays at each symposium for many, many years. I'm not sure how far back they go. So I've written a lot of articles for the newsletter. It's a good group. I also support the cleanup. I like the fact that mineralogy, folks that are interested in mineralogy, mineral collectors, can do something to actually create a good name with an organization like the National Forest Service, where there have been some other instances with mineral collectors that gone in blasted places and things like that, and kind of created a bad reputation. You can't collect here. And they don't feel that way in Okanagan National Forest, because we've had many, many years of cleaning up and doing various things, mostly cleaning up litter, but they've had us do some other things, I think, cutting brush and so forth. So I facilitated that, I guess, the cleanup a number of times, and have attended many other ones. So great. I think it's a great organization. It's a national organization too. I like the displays, and I think our newsletters, if you look back probably through the years, you've got a great record of the nature of collections in the Northwest, the folks that have displayed. And I really congratulate anybody who puts in a display, because it's, we try not to lose that information, kind of preserve it, and minerals live longer than people do, and so, it's like something that actually is part of, science and so forth. Anyways, there you go.
This is from the guy who replaced me as president of this group. So I started in 1986. We were in Tacoma, which was really impressive if you've been there in that place. I think they tore it down later. So started in 1986. The first one was, that was on the Mexican minerals, and they actually brought in the guy that ran the museum there to talk to us, and I thought that was great, because I had been working on geology. I actually spent 3 years at Western Washington, and so we kind of got together, and it was pretty good, because I started collecting with these guys, and it became kind of a big deal. Before that, I collected all the white stuff, zeolites, and so I knew a few, like Rudy and those guys. But here's now a group that I could associate with and do things with, go collecting and whatnot. First time I went up to Washington Pass and collected, it was like, wow, this is something else, because I never thought anything was in Washington worth it, but that changed. And so I kind of started with the group, and I got involved. I was working rotating shifts, so I could mix. I missed a lot of meetings, but I only missed, the first, up until 2016, I only missed one meeting. That was when they had on the peninsula, some little town in the middle of nowhere. So anyhow, I got involved with the group, and I ended up saving Aaron's life or whatever, taking up the job of president. And I did that for a couple of years. I also did the newsletter and a bunch of other things, organized the trips up to Washington Pass for a few years, and went and picked up the displayed cases and set them up and stuff like that. And so then in the late 90s, I started taking people out. The first year that I did that, I had, there were 14 of us, and we went through Nevada and collected Nevada and Utah for 2 weeks. And then I did that again, I think in 99. So I really got involved with it, and I really enjoyed it since then. It's been something I've been looking forward to every year. And so here I am.
Good. Okay, well, I don't have to tell you when I first started going to the meeting, to the FM Symposium, because they all told you already. So that was Tualatin in 1976. And the reason I didn't get to anything sooner was I was working in Utah. And that just happened to be, when did FM get started? About 74? 74. I learned about it from information in the mineralogical record. And so I wrote a letter to Mr. Montgomery, Arthur Montgomery, and told him I was in Utah, that I don't seem to see any mineral collectors around down here, and I'd like to join this organization. He asked me, he said, well, there's nothing in Utah at the moment. Maybe join the Colorado group. And I says, no, I'll probably be moving back up to the Northwest soon. And he said, well, contact Mike Groban in Coos Bay, Oregon, and join the Pacific Northwest chapter. So I did. And Mike said, hey, we're having a symposium coming up, in, well, the first one would be October 78. And so that's how I ended up here and a member of these guys. And I've done about what these guys have done. I've never been an officer or anything like that, but used to help Wes and the Hindermans and all the other good, hardworking people that put it together back then, and set up displays and various things like that. And then I took on the publicity for, I don't know, maybe around 5 years or 4 years, and published our chapter newsletter for about 4 years, maybe 5 years before Lindell took it over from me. And since then, I periodically get the ambition to, instead of setting up my room to sell, I go help whoever's setting up and stuff. And mostly become lazy about that sort of thing, although kind of busy too. But other than that, I think I've hit every symposium that has happened since '78. I don't think I missed one, and had a heck of a good time. And hope I've helped people and passed on some information, as well as I used to do a lot of talks and stuff too, like most of these guys have. So been a great time.
Cool. Yeah, I think you touched on something that, all of you have service to this organization. It takes a lot of people to run this chapter. And there are about a dozen people who kind of rotate through, over the years. I mean, a lot of you, there'll be a core group, and then, every now and then one or two will drop out and somebody else will pick it up. But it's really cool for a volunteer organization to be this strong after this many years. So, it started with some of the people right here. Lanny, I want to ask you about a couple of other projects that you've been involved in. Just one thing that came up last night in the hallway at the hotel about your mineral index. You did that for a while. I love that project, and I had that for a while. Can you talk about that?
Oh, the index of the periodicals.
Yes.
Is that the one you mean?
Yes, yeah.
Because there's also was actual mineral index.
Oh,
I
right.
did the one for Washington and Idaho
Right.
and
yeah.
Montana.
Oh, right.
Which the FM
yeah.
was doing a project to sort of get recorded all the known mineral localities in
Right.
each state. That
Well-
sort of got.
Well, both of
know how
those. So
that
yeah,
was.
you've been involved in that. I
Yeah.
know you're working on Minerals of Washington now. We might get to that. You started
Yeah.
Mineral News. Okay.
Started it and published it for 19 years, and then sold it to Tony Nickisher back in New York, and he's still publishing it, so that's kind of neat. And the fun thing I always like is he's still publishing exactly the format and the way I set it up. So it's kind of anyway. Your question about the index, I don't know why I got the crazy idea of wasting all my time. It felt like I created an index of the mineral magazines, the complete index of the mineralogical record, and the mineral news that I was publishing, rocks and minerals with the current issues. I started subscribing in, I don't remember what year it was. Somebody here knows because they bought them from me anyway. And then they liked it, and so they kept sending me all the back issues all the way back to 1946, which I've since, well, I sold them yesterday. Anyway, I tried to make a real complete index, searchable, that had, you could search every photo, every locality, every article, every author, etc. And, well, technically I did it to make money, but I never got even close to making money unless you like making 2 pennies an hour or something to create it. And I actually still have it, although at the moment I can't make you a copy because my Mac doesn't recognize my CD drive anymore, so I can't. I have to go buy a new CD drive or something to get it to work. But it's actually, even though I haven't done it for about, see, what was it, 2021, 22, 23 was when I stopped. No, that was too soon. I don't remember when I stopped doing it, but it was complete up to then. So if you, lately, of course, it doesn't have the, the magazines in it. But it was quite a project, yeah.
Well, I had a couple of editions of that, and it was very helpful to me, and I recognized the level of effort required to keep a project like that going. So thank you for for the time that you were working on that. And yeah, you've been to a couple of editions of Minerals of Idaho, right?
Yeah,
At
two.
least
And I'm
two, yeah.
actually going to do the third one. I am working on it, and I'd probably be working on it if I wasn't sitting here.
Sorry.
And okay, those who have Idaho Minerals, I did it the same way that Shannon did. Let's see, what was that, 1921 from the Smithsonian, which he did it alphabetical by mineral. And that's nice, but most of us think localities. So when I did the second edition revision, I still did that, but now I've redone it by localities. So that you can, because that's what most of us think. We don't sit here and say, well, gee, where are all the native settler localities in Idaho? We think of what's at the Bunker Hill Mine or something like that. So the new edition, which I hope to get out, let's say within a year, is totally revised that way. And it's probably only going to be electronic. No, I'm going to do it in paper, but it's going to cost you because it'll be, by the on-demand printing. And it's already just the text is, let's see, somewhere between 400 and 500 pages. And when I throw in as many photographs as I want to, it's going to be a lot of color pages. And it's going to be, I think the last time I figured out, it'll cost you at least 60, or cost me at least $60 just for each copy to be printed. So it's going to be pricey. But I want to do it electronic also, but the book that big, I'm not sure anybody really makes a file that works that big.
Okay, thanks. I want to get into try to get into some people stories. We've got about 20 minutes or so left. See if I can tease out some people stories. And then I want to get to collecting sites and collecting memories and things like that. And if we have some time, I'll try to block out some time at the end. I'd like to take some questions from people here attending in person. Several of you have collected together, obviously collecting zeolites and Washington Pass.
Sure about each other? No.
Not talking. They are not talking. Okay.
Want to stay friends.
Okay. All right. Well, we can move on to the conclusion then. So, no.
We collected during the Wild West of mineral collecting. And things were a lot different in those days. Very few things were claimed when we first started collecting. We could go anywhere, do anything, and we did. And so things have changed a lot from our heydays of collecting. How shall I put it? There were camps, animosities between camps and groups and things like that, which is no different than it is today. I sense the same thing amongst the collectors today. And we don't want to get into those stories either here. I mean, that's not the place for any of that kind of stuff. So I don't know, do you want just a collecting story of...
Yeah, I mean, what's one of your favorite sites?
Well, I'll tell a Washington Pass story, although I'm sitting next to Mr. Washington Pass, so but we used to go early to Washington Pass. We were collecting there in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And when we were still pushing the envelope back, everything hadn't been discovered, everything hadn't been found yet. But there were still some classic areas that did produce, and one of them is the traditional rock slide. And probably the best Zechstrite pocket I ever hit. When you go to a place that's been collected a lot, you have to have a new angle, a new way of looking at things. So this particular day, I decided that I was going to climb under every single boulder in the rock slide, belly up, and just squirm underneath like a worm under every little spot that I could find, figuring that everybody else had already looked at the top of these boulders. There was a big boulder way down in the bottom of the rock slide, bigger than a car, smaller than an RV, that had some quartz seams across the top and a couple pockets in this quartz seam. You worked the same boulder. And you could tell it had been worked before. So I climb underneath it and lay on my back and went underneath, and the quartz seam was underneath the boulder too and extended. And so I don't know what possessed me, but I took a chisel and I laid it against the quartz seam, and in one blow, I hit the chisel and it disappeared up into a hole. And so I took my chisel, reached down with my chisel, and I could feel it rattling around, and there was debris in the pocket, so I held the debris back and brought the first little bit down. I just switch hands back and forth to work the pocket. The first thing down was about, 1 1/4 inch dextrite. And I call it the slot machine pocket because what had happened is this boulder rolled down the hill, and all the dextrites had formed across these veils of feldspar that had grown across the pocket. So when the boulder tumbled down the hill, all these veils had broken up, and there were all these dextrites on feldspar veils laying in the pocket. And so I started pulling them out, and there was probably 150 of them in the pocket. And each one that I pulled down, I mean, there were getting to be so many, there were more dextrites than I knew that I could possibly keep. So I was yelling up at Kristen, "Oh, I just got a Bisbee azurite. Oh, because I knew I was going to be trading all this material." So everyone that came down, I was shouting up to her what I'd just found. It was going to be this or it was going to be that. And it was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had collecting.
It's actually very difficult to figure out what's the best experience collecting was, because hey, I was collecting last weekend. That's the best, currently. But some stories. In the early years, spent a lot of time concentrating on King County quartz localities, and Spruce was one of those localities. And those early years, Bob Jackson was the first years that he was mining it, and he would mine it for 2 months, maybe something like that, and then leave, and he didn't care if we went up afterwards. And so it was great, go out up there day after he left and pick through his empty pockets, which weren't quite empty, and all sorts of interesting debris. Well, I wasn't the only one that did that. John did it, and kind of became a little bit of a competitive thing. And I remember one time, my collecting partner, Don Stalder at the time, and I were bouncing up the Middle Fork Road and pulled into the parking lot for Spruce, and damn, who's that there? So we get out of the car, and the next thing I know, John's head pops out the back, and he goes, "Damn, you beat me to it." He was still asleep in the back of his truck.
I worked a swing shift, so I would drive up after midnight on the swing shift. I'd drive up there and sleep in my car, get up at dawn, go up and collect, come hike down at noon, and be back to work on my swing shift without even a shower at 2 o'clock the next day. So.
But we drove from home in Marysville area and beat him before he got up.
What was collecting at Spruce like then? I see pictures of people. I've never been there myself, but I see people rappelling down with
it was
hammers.
We went up there after Bob was done. Okay, hammer and chisel, nothing else, and it was way too easy to go through Bob's empty pockets, put quotation marks on it, because frequently you could find little extensions on them or in the bottom things he missed. And it was too easy that, so never really did any serious hammer and chisel work. And the rock was pretty hard and tough because he was blasting it, and so hammer and chisel work, it's the odds are higher that, you might not find anything or a pocket. Though I know people who have found pockets by doing that. So anyway, that was, it was kind of funny in retrospect, we're sitting there competing with each other. And also spent, my first many years was collecting King County quartz. And then, it's like, okay, it's quartz. So I started collecting with Rudy Chernick, who is no longer with us. But as many of you remember him, he was one of the world's renowned zeolite experts, maybe the renowned expert. And he was actually a neighbor of mine, but I met him years earlier, but we started collecting together in the early 1990s. And really liked that because I had a four-wheel drive truck, and he had a little Toyota van, which couldn't handle some of those roads. So next thing I know, every weekend for a couple of summers during the springtime, we would making the trip from north of Everett all the way down to southeast Washington, and then spend hours and hours and hours driving logging roads looking for quarries. Found a few, and then of course there was the trips where 13 or 14 hours of driving and we didn't see anything. But doing those trips with Rudy was an education, because he's talking zeolites. And those trips, plus a trip I took with him to Denver, it was like going to grad school in zeolite mineralogy. And it's like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And then later, collecting decades is more a focus on exploring Idaho and Montana and Washington with Lanny, looking at every mine dump we can find for micros. Really love finding some of those micros, because you have a mine dump that's totally barren. Anybody looking for macrocrystals, and there's nothing here. And you look closely and say spend an hour looking closely, you've just found a great microspecimen kind of thing. So you can turn a non-locality into a locality. And spend a lot of time doing that, all these different mines and interesting micros. But my favorite locality and the most educational for me has got to be Washington Pass. And you know, the big zexterites are great, the bigger pockets, but it's when you really start diving into the micro world and you're no longer collecting pockets, you're collecting pounds of vuggy rock to take home and dissect. And you're naming boulders, trying to remember where they are, and you find these weird things 6 months later. Darn, I can't remember where that boulder was.
Quentin White, in his lecture on micromounting, says that the biggest lie of micromounting is that it doesn't take up much space. And the reason that that's a lie is that micromounters collect boulders with holes in them. So, Bob, you have a
Yeah, I
favorite spot
can. I have
besides
very
Tiger?
similar, I guess, experiences. And I've collected with, I think, most of the people here. One of the things I was thinking when you were talking about Washington Pass, one thing that I did was, zexterite, which is pretty plentiful on the that main road cut, and then down below, fluoresces, pretty brightly. And so I actually took a UV light one time at night, or actually it was getting to be dusk. So I could get down below, and I just put duct tape where it was glowing. And then the next day I went, and actually I found pretty good pockets just from, because it's like you can't really tell sometimes from the rock that it's there. And so that was one thing that, remember going up, one of the guys that I did a lot of collecting with was Bob Boggs. And he would take you up Liberty Bell up that way, and he knew all the different boulders and so forth that were up there. And that micro stuff is very fascinating, finding stuff like okanaganite and so forth. So that was one thing. Another guy that we miss is Ty Balacco, who lived for many years as an FM member, and he lived up in Delta, BC, Canada. And I always kind of like the kind of odd chemistries and stuff. He might have picked it up because of the tiger stuff, And so he had silver sulfosalt minerals that were like at the Symposium. It was like diaphrite and friesliebonite, and these just like things that you expect to see from like, Czechoslovakia or something. It's like those really, oh yeah, you can collect those. And so used to go up, and I'd stay with Ty, and we'd get up in the morning, and where do you want to go today? Well, we could go up to, and there was several other locations up there, Bear Mountain, some other things. How about Van Silver? Oh, we were just there yesterday. Oh, yeah, that's good, Well, one time I was going to school, and I had so I wasn't working. He was retired. And I had like a month or something off, and hey, Ty, I'll come on up, and we could do some collecting. And it was kind of like one of those things where it just got to be day after day. and we went up to Van Silver, and typically it was the collecting location isn't in a mine. This stuff was all pulled out of a mine, and it's this big, basically a dump. It looks kind of chalky. It's got there are chunks of rock that have sort of altered and become gooey clay. But the best stuff was this white, kind of carbonaceous, like rhyolite, and it had bugs and these rare sulfur salt minerals, silver sulfur salts. And typically when you collected, if you dig down into you get a little trench, and then you pull the rocks out, the fresh ones, and you can either tell right away that it's got a sulfide in it, or you just break it to see. There are also some nodules that are like geodes too that you have to watch out for. Anyways, we went up there, and the next day, where do you want to go? Van Silver. And so we did this like 5, 6, 7 days in a row, and this trench wouldn't have collapsed in overnight. Never stayed there. Always drove up from Delta to Van Silver. But anyways, this trench exposed an area of the pit that hadn't seen any other collecting action, and we started finding these. There's one thing is there's a lot of belangerite there. Acicular, metallic, stuff. But it also occurred in rings, which it's not unknown from other locations. I think Madoc, Ontario has got them. But it also has these tubes, and the tubes are, not silvery. They're like black, and we started getting the tubes, and so we called that the Tube City trench. And that, actually, I took a bunch of that stuff over to Bart Cannon's and had him analyze it, and it isn't belangerite. It's probably a new species, but just to try and get somebody to, describe it would be kind of tough. And sometimes, finding, we found stuff out at the Black Pine, the Black Pine mine that's probably new species. But actually getting someone to actually describe that and put the amount of work that it takes into doing it is a serious undertaking. So like when I talked earlier about the Bob Meyerite, that was that one actually did take a lot of work, but it was like from my favorite location. So push that one through. But
Yeah,
there's
it's pretty
there's
rare.
other new ones.
Pretty rare that something is clearly a new mineral and you can get
Yeah.
somebody to work it through.
And like we've
right
got new
away.
ones up at Washington Pass. We've got, like that one up to up at Van Silver.
How
which
many
is-
unknowns are left? Are there any?
Yeah.
Yeah, how many unknowns at Washington Pass right now that are
I had
known unknowns?
a working list of unable to visually identify, so there's over 130.
Over 130 that you
Unable to confidentially visually identify.
not identified yet. Okay, so
And Frank's still working on stuff from Bear Basin for us too. Frank Kush at Harvard.
Frank Kush at Harvard is still working on
There's
some.
2 more new minerals from Bear Basin that will be described.
And I do want to say that Marcus Raschke has been instrumental in doing analysis on a lot of these unknowns, and some of them we're pretty positive what they are, but it's still a little question mark.
Yeah.
But we do have a new one's coming out, a new article coming out here soon.
Us old guys can't collect anymore, so we
Have to collect in your cabinets. Wes, when I invited you, you said I've got stories. So what did you have?
Okay,
in
yeah, I
mind?
do, but I'm not going to tell a lot of them. These guys be embarrassed enough already. So anyhow, I got involved with these guys, started collecting with them. I remember the first time I went to Washington Pass, and I had Randy and the big boulder. You guys, I went up there, it was 164, and you guys were sitting there pounding on it, and it was rounded off. I mean, everybody and their brother been pounding on these rocks. It was about the size of a car. And you guys left and said, here, have it. And about an hour later, I broke open a nice bunch of amazonite crystals. Thanks. So I got involved with a lot of the stuff locally with these guys, and then kind of worked with a couple of other people. One of them was John Dagenet, who's passed away a couple of years ago. And so it was, we went everywhere because he started getting into micros, and we started collecting with Joe Marty and his group. Joe is famous for his micros. And so we ended up going all the way down to California, Nevada, Utah. And, you can ask Deb about how much rock I brought home with micros. And, the springs on the car weren't too good. Anyhow, it was the best of times. And so I really feel good about everything that I've done, collected, and about the people I collected with. And, they all got stories. I got stories. It's just a matter of who I'm going to tell. But no, it's all good. And I'm happy to have been involved with this.
Well, I'm just going to leave my story basically with his. It hasn't been really so much the localities and a great discovery. It's been, I think I've collected with every one of these guys, most of them 2 or 3 times. And of course, Randy, we collected 1 or 2 trips a year for, well,
30 plus.
yeah, or whatever, forever. So, it's the camaraderie in the group and these guys and a whole lot of you guys that we've been with and so on.
We're getting close to, well, I'm going to go for another few minutes, but I don't want this to be a downer, but there are a few names that have come up that are no longer with us. Bart Cannon is sorely missed. Rudy Chernich, a literal walking encyclopedia of zeolites and localities. And you've mentioned a few other names. Are there some that we have not mentioned here?
Doug
Tolan. Doug Tolan,
Chris Van Leer, he wasn't real.
Chris Van Leer.
Who else?
Norm Radford, he used to come to all the meetings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ray Lasmana.
Ray Lasmanos.
Ed Moulton.
Ed Mulsey. Yeah. Al Liebetraw. So anyway, very fortunate to have these stories. Thank you for sharing your time. I'm going to go to the audience now, and if there are some burning questions, or if you want to ask something you've been dying to ask one of these people, something that you think would be a useful story to share, and then we'll wrap this up.
So I want to thank you all again for coming. And as current president, I would really like your best pieces of advice for myself. Most of you have had this position before.
Most of you had the position as president. What of FM, Pacific Northwest chapter of FM? Any advice, suggestions?
My best advice is communication. We're a spread out group. We're over 4 or 5 states and a province. Most of your members only have this one time a year where they can see each other personally. And to keep an organization like this alive and well, there has to be a strong line of communication with the group. Back when I was president, we used to have a quarterly meeting. And I tried to put it, we had Joe Nagel hosted us up at UBC. The Rices hosted it down at their home. Bob Smith used to host us at Seattle U. Ray Lasmanis hosted us at the state. But we'd move it around because nobody wants to drive 300 miles to a meeting. So you'd get these little group sessions that at least kept people somewhat involved. You do have a newsletter that helps keep people involved, but a lot of people don't take the time to open it up out of their email. It just takes, it's only a 1 or 2 button push, but I bet half the people don't read their newsletters. So social media is a real powerful way of doing that. And I think that this show and the number of people here is the first example of how strong social media can be and keeping your group organized and together. So.
Any other past president advice?
I'm not past president, but I agree fully with what John said and want to add that social media may have brought more people here, but not all of us look at social media, or there's different kinds of social media. So I would strongly encourage FM to have just an internet easily available without going into Facebook or any of those others, website that has the same kind of information on it. Because I will go search on FM online, I don't find much unless I go into Facebook kind of thing. So I would like to see more generalized information there too as well.
Yeah, I'd say one thing that I would keep an eye on, particularly now, and I think you're doing this, is to kind of evolve the programs and so forth to meet what's going on. Had some of that go on when I was president. We started, we had put out electronic newsletters. They wanted a spring we tried various things that the members were interested in doing. So, I think right now where we've got the kind of the virtual audience also, it's a great thing. I like the idea of having it here at the school. So just kind of, I'd say keep the pulse of what the kind of the members seek feedback from what folks are saying about what they would like to see, what they like, what they didn't like, and then also encouraging folks to participate and contribute is a good thing, I'd say.
All right, one last question from the audience, and then we do need to wrap up. So.
How has the change of access affected the overall collecting of minerals?
Yeah.
How is the overall, I'm repeating the question for the online, on the, how is the overall access, changes in access collected, affected collecting?
I think it's there's goods and there's bads. When we were first collecting, Weyerhaeuser left all the roads open. There weren't any gates. Most places weren't claimed. We had access. But the difference is we didn't have GPS. We didn't have the internet to research places. It was word of mouth from the group. We'd learn about places so it was, we relied on each other for information more than you have to now. Now with GPS, you can hear about a spot, and within 15 minutes on the internet, you've got it pinned down from Google Earth. You know exactly where it is. You can pin it. You can take your phone. You can find it walking to your phone. I can't tell you how many Bart Cannon trips that I've taken bushwhacking up and down hills, up and down hills, up and down hills, looking for an adit that we never found that day. Finally, like the third trip there, we'd finally find it. Now you can pinpoint it right with the GPS. Look on your phone and tell if you're 20 feet away. So, you have advantages that we didn't have. But then as far as road access and things like that, we have advantages that you don't have. So
There's still places you can collect, though.
there's some of my young friends are killing it this year.
Well, I think that's a good point to end on. John said that some of the young folks are killing it out there. So not all bad news. We have fewer roads to drive and look for outcrops, but the technology is helping us. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And that concludes the panel.